Hello, this is Mesh, and welcome to another theories video. So this one is more about the secondary story within Season 2. So the story arc surrounding BB-8, Buck, French, Angie, Steve, and Jessie. So this arc, of course, eventually aligns with the OA and her story, but for the most part, they are a separate story within Season 2. So which out of these characters travelled to the new dimension at the very end of the season? So to start, we all know these characters who did the movements could have travelled if they had the will to travel. As we've seen this before, so previously when Hap injected all his prisoners, they all had the will to travel, of course, because if they stayed, they would have died. And I guess that's motivation for you. So all these characters that were doing the movements could have potentially travelled to another dimension. So who travelled out of those 5? I think the question might be which characters had a reason to stay in their current dimension. I'll break down the 5 characters and go over some motives, or lack thereof, to stay or go to a new dimension. So let's start with Angie. She was a really unknown character. It's hard to gauge her motives. A mysterious character, all we really know about her is her wealthy, absent parents. And I guess a lack of enthusiasm at school as well. We saw that in the first season. So no real obvious reason for her to travel. No real reason for her not to either. If she has an adventurous spirit, I guess, she could have jumped. We did see her though trying to talk Steve out of going previously, which would suggest she didn't want to go herself. So for me, the chance of Angie jumping is quite unlikely. But we know so little about her, it's a really tough call. So now moving on to Buck Vu. So a really troubled character in Season 2, and Season 1 as well. But Buck seems to be suffering from a tragic loss, the loss of losing the OA, and a general life unhappiness because of family issues. It wouldn't surprise me if Buck changed dimensions. But on the counter-argument to this, we saw Michelle in the alternate dimension wanting to travel back to her original dimension, so being uncertain and hesitant, and I guess the realization of what happened. I mean, does Buck have the same attributes? Would he possibly lose that enthusiasm for changing when the situation became very real? Or has Buck's journey with his friends in life really made him want to jump to an alternate dimension as well? Has it given Buck some more strength to want to do that? For me, the possibility of Buck traveling to a new dimension is quite probable. With the family issues, seems to be longing for change, and just to be reunited with the OA with his friends, it seems like he would probably go. Okay, now moving on to Alfonso French Sosa. So another troubled character, but I think he has enough to want to stay in his current dimension. You saw early on in the season, Steve actually called him out on this scenario, saying he has a cushy career to live up to, and he has his deadbeat brothers who he has to look after. Obviously, French didn't like that and reacted, but we see French does have a positive future with his university, and also he definitely feels obligated to look after his brothers. So for me, I think French would probably not have travelled. I didn't think he would want to leave his family behind. So for me, I think it was quite likely that French did not travel to a new dimension. Now let's talk about Steve Winchell. Of course Steve travelled. We saw that as he jumped into the ambulance and confronted Hap. So moving on, let's talk about BB-8. So Betty Broderick Allen, she no longer has a job. Her brother is dead. Her uncle is dying. Her uncle who she looked up to a lot. Her cousin has also just betrayed her. In addition, she's on the run from the FBI. So BB-8 for me is also a very likely traveller. No reason to stay in her current dimension. And also, in addition to all of this, her mind has just been opened up to the universe and the possibilities, so she could be seeking further adventure at her newfound abilities, you could say. So now she can, sense the spirit world, or whatever you want to say her abilities are. Maybe that has made her more adventurous in life. So in summary, I think the travellers who likely have jumped would of course have been Steve, because we saw that. But in addition, I think Buck and BB-8 also travelled to the new dimension, leaving only French and Angie behind. And finally, let's mention Jessie. Jessie of course never made it to that final episode, so we witnessed Jessie's suicide. The question would be, did Steve manage to enable Jessie to travel to another dimension after he killed himself? We saw Steve doing the movements all day, trying to give Jessie a chance, trying to give him that opportunity. But unfortunately for me, I don't think it would have worked. It wasn't planned. Jessie was already long dead before Steve started even doing the movements. And on top of that, it was only one person doing the movements. So in theory, it would fail by default because you require 5 people for the movements to work. We've seen that before. So my gut assumption is that Jessie in that dimension didn't leave to another dimension. But, this is the OA TV series. This does open the discussion to what occurs to the soul and consciousness after you die within the OA TV show. As we saw with Rachel when she was killed by Hap. Not only did her soul change to another dimension, she managed to inhabit an inanimate object. So really the sky's the limit. Perhaps even though Steve failed to enable Jessie to travel to another dimension to possess another version of himself, maybe he will travel to an alternative dimension anyway and inhabit some random inanimate object similar as to what Rachel did. So perhaps we will see Jessie next season as possessed some inanimate object to help in season 3. As well as his character, another version of his character in another dimension will still be alive as well. Or possibly they align with death as well. I mean, we see they align when people meet up. Maybe Jessie died in multiple dimensions at that point. But that's a whole nother discussion anyway. So I'll leave this here. So what do you think? Who out of the 5 do you think traveled to the new dimension? If you like this content, subscribe to the channel for more of it. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up and leave me some feedback below. But until next time, this is Mesh, and I'll see you later.